The Zulu people are one of the most strongest warrior tribes in African history. And today, as somebody who's been into bodybuilding for a while, I'm going to take a look at the Zulu diet and rate it on the S to F tier system to see how good it is for building aesthetic muscle and a good physique, as well as certain looks maxing benefits. So with that being said, let's get into it, man. Now, the Zulu are a Bantu people. They're part of the Bantu macro language family inside of Africa. And one of the biggest food sources when it comes to the Zulu people is agriculture. The Zulus are kind of unique when it comes to Bantus and Niger Congos, specifically because they also have a pastoral element within their diet or within their food sources, which, as we'll see, will give them a sort of little bit of benefit when it comes to just being able to have a good amount of protein sources. So the diet's going to be a little bit more balanced. The Zulus are known for many different things. Obviously, Shaka Zulu is a really important or big figure in African history, with his, military tactics that really helped the Zulu become a dominant force within Southern Africa, by the time that the Europeans came and found them. And so let's look at the diet. Let's see what these warriors, what these soldiers, what these people like Shaka Zulu, what they were eating, what their diet most likely looked like, what it contained, and how good that works on the SDF system. How good is that for bodybuilding? Now, the study that I took a look at for this video comes from more modern Zulu people living in the KwaZulu province of South Africa. These foods and percentages should take them with a grain of salt, obviously, because they are modern numbers, but they shouldn't really be super different from historical numbers or historical accounts of what people were actually eating. Now, taking a look at their diet, the Zulus pretty much have the highest frequency of consumptions when it comes to cereals. About 90% of people eat good amounts of cereal, and this might have contain things like maize or sorghum and things of that nature. And for vegetables, it's 70%. For organs, for flesh and organs, so this is sort of meat and protein sources that the Zulus have, it'll be about 40% of people who eat that regularly on a day-to-day basis, and then 35% fruits, and then about 0.8% milk products, which is, again, that shows that pastoral element, both with that meat and milk. Those percentages are based off of how many people claim to have eaten these things on the day these measurements or these results were taken. Again, matching up with that pastoral element, you also had older European travelers who did mention them eating this meal called amesi. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, but basically it was supposed to be a fermented sour milk meal. I don't know if it was a certain type of yogurt or what exactly it is. I'll leave some pictures of it, but this definitely does show the pastoral element amongst the Zulus. But also you have documentation, obviously both modern and historic, of more cereal consumption, things like sorghum and maize, like I said earlier. So when it comes to protein, looking at their protein sources, they do have pretty good protein sources. Pretty much it's mostly organs and meats / livers from animals, most likely things like cattle, sheep, and goats. And then obviously there is the fermented sour milk meal that they eat. So the protein sources are pretty good when it comes to the Zulu people. Unfortunately, though, they aren't really that high. And I'll show you the sort of arrangements, the percentages of the different, elements of the diet. And obviously, when it comes to building an aesthetic physique or having an aesthetic diet, the amount of protein energy intake you're supposed to be getting from your total diet daily has to be around 30 to around 35%. And the Zulu diet, it does fall short of that. But the thing to note about this is that the protein sources are pretty high quality. Now, looking at carbohydrates, this is where the Zulu diet is probably the richest, obviously because they are agriculturists or agro-pastoralists, if you want to push it there. This takes about 37% of their diet, and the types of food that they eat, or the type of carbohydrates that they eat, obviously are sorghum, porridge, cornmeal, maize, things of that nature. Some of the meals are also known as futu. I don't know if that, if I pronounced that right, but that is basically one of the main porridges that the Zulus eat, amongst a few others, such as, I'm not even gonna say these names, but I'll leave them up here on the screen. And again, this is the carbohydrate intake for the Zulus. So when it comes to this part of the diet, it is pretty rich because again, there's a lot of carbohydrates. So it's going to be able to fuel things like workouts. Pretty much a lot better than the Maasai diet where there's almost no carbohydrates at all. But it does lack a little bit more in the protein sources for the Zulu diet. But when it comes to carbohydrates, it is pretty strong. Obviously because they're more agriculturalist type of people. So they're going to be consuming that a lot more. So since they're a carb dominant diet, you're gonna have a lot of fuel for exercise, a lot of energy you're gonna be getting from this diet. Now, when it comes to fat, this is the last macronutrient we're gonna be covering. They have some pretty good sources. Again, you can get that from, the meats, the more organ meats. So again, things like liver, that sort of like, more hardcore stuff. They have good sources of fat because they come from these meats, but as well as the fermented sour milk. However, the amounts that is consumed, again, these are the more pastoral elements of the Zulu diet. It isn't actually that high. It only accounts for about like 20-something% of the diet. So it isn't really high fat, and this can be, a bad thing for testosterone. But this can be a bad thing for testosterone just because, fat is probably one of the more important hormones when it comes to helping things like testosterone. So that is a point there where the Zulu diet is a little bit weaker. Looking at their daily calorie intake, it's a lot closer to about 1,700. So it is more of a deficit type of diet. So, that is one thing. It can be sort of a negative. If you're, it depends if you want to lose weight. But since there's not a lot of protein, if you want to be super strict with it, if you just sort of follow this to a T, it wouldn't be super effective because you'd be, if you're a skinny guy and you want to bulk up, well, you're going to be losing size and you're not even going to be hitting your protein targets. And so it's going to be more of a, limiter. But looking at the macros, especially in consideration to the sort of daily diet intake, well, you got carbs that take almost 40% of their macros. You got fat, which is probably no bigger than 5 to 10%. And then you have protein, which probably is, again, no bigger than 21%. So you basically have a protein, which is 20-something% protein, about, like 5% fat, and then probably about like, 40% carbs. This is the sort of like split that they have. It isn't exactly, the greatest split when it comes for actually building muscle. But the thing that's important is, although the percentages might not be the most effective, the food sources are actually pretty good or pretty high quality, which is probably what gives the Zulu diet its sort of edge. There's a diverse amount of foods, good sources for everything, but the percentages just have to be tweaked. And again, the daily calorie intake has to be tweaked to, match each person's need, right? So something like 1,700 for most people, including myself, that's going to match more of a deficit. I don't know how, tall, how much you might have to weigh in order for that to be sort of like maintenance, but this is sort of like female numbers, you know what I mean? When it comes to like just like maintenance, it's a very low number. Now, considering that the Zulu diet, looking at its macronutrients, some of the listed macronutrients that we have for this diet are iron, magnesium, potassium, zinc, B vitamins, A vitamin C, and E. You also have very rich in vitamin A, B1, B6, C, and E, and then we also have some leafy vegetables which provide some other things like folate. Besides that, we have the fermented sour milk, which is a very low consumption that gives A vitamins, B9 vitamins, and C vitamins. So pretty much what we can tell is that this diet is very macronutrient rich. Looking at it, which is pretty good. It'll help a lot more with the looks maxing things. When it comes to just getting certain vitamins that might be needed. Might not be super effective, super important when it comes to just, building muscle, aesthetic physique, but for the looks maxing, usually you want to look at the micronutrients, which have a lot more better benefits. So yeah, looking at this, how sustainable the diet is. It is very sustainable. Lots of the food sources, maybe besides like the organs, the animal organs, the meat organs, you might be able to get that, but for the most part, the majority of the diet is very sustainable. It's very easy to replicate as someone living in the West or in a modern first world country. So that is where the Zulu diet does get good plus points. Obviously, you're gonna need to be able to modify the percentages in order to make it more effective, but pretty replicable for the average person, especially if you're trying to get in the gym. Porridge, meat, milk, these are great sources to get protein and energy and carbs and fat. So yeah, overall, looking at the diet's biggest weaknesses and strengths, well, the strengths are that it's very practical, it's good for energy, good carb heavy diet, there are lots of macronutrients, and there are good quality protein sources. However, its weaknesses are not enough daily calorie intake, especially not for protein. Because some of the biggest massive flaws of this diet is that obviously there's not enough daily protein intake and not enough fat, which is obviously not good for muscle or hormonal support like testosterone. So taking a look at it, at the diet, the entire Zulu diet, for its overall rating, looking at the protein section for protein quality and density, well, we'll get about a 6.5 because the protein sources are pretty good, but there's just simply not enough for muscle growth. When it comes to carbohydrates, it'll get an 8.5, obviously because pretty good sources of carbs and a good amount of them, about almost 37%, almost 40% of their diet. So, it will get a higher rating there. And there's obviously a diverse amount of carb food sources. Looking at fat quality and hormonal support, we'll get a 5.5. Some of the fat sources, again, are pretty good, but again, simply there's just not enough to boost things like testosterone. When it comes to energy balance and muscle environment, it'll get about a 6 out of 10. Simply there's just not enough calories every single day. And again, the percentages are pretty, could use some tweaking. Looking at the macronutrients, it'll get an 8.5 simply because obviously, like I stated before, there's a lot of micronutrients. So this might be good when it comes to more of your looks maxing and sort of like the details about your body, physique, and health that you might care about. When it comes to practicality and sustainability, it gets a 9.0. It's probably the most compatible diet, especially in comparison with the Maasai diet that I did recently, where it is a lot more similar to modern Western diets, where there's a lot more carbohydrates. And again, there's the food sources are a lot easier to attain. It's a lot easier to get access to things like carbs, and although there's a diverse amount of food sources, they're pretty simple. They shouldn't be things that people should have a hard time getting their hands on. And it's not anything crazy. It's not a crazy diet. The craziest thing really is the livers. But yeah, so maybe the liver meat, the organ meats and whatever, that might make it go to about an 8, but we'll give it a 9. So the overall score rating that the Zulu diet gets is a 7.1. So a little bit lower than the Maasai, which was about a 7.5, but enough to give it the same class rating. It'll get a B tier rating for overall diet. So with that being said, hope you enjoyed the video. Hope you learned something new about the Zulu diet. I will leave a link to the study that I got it from in the description if you want to take a look, see where I got some of this information from. And if you're interested in my own personal diet plan, where it has the perfect diet, pretty much the perfect split for macronutrients and all the micronutrients, the things that I look for and I shop for whenever I go shopping for food in order to support muscle growth and things of that nature. Be the first thing in the description. My school, Ascendancy School community, basically a fitness community where I share all of my knowledge when it comes to fitness, training, looks maxing, etc. Especially from that ethnic perspective, ethnic meals, looking at things like we looked at today, the Zulu diet, Maasai diet, pastoral diet, things like that. All that sort of information will be there. And here's the word from our sponsor that will basically describe it in a lot more detail. So with that being said, bro, peace. Yeah, with all that being said, if you'd want me or have any recommendations for any other ethnic groups or even especially other African ethnic groups that you want me to rate their diet, just let me know in the comments and I'll get to it. But that being said, peace. Basically what that was about is I've been lifting for about 3 years and I know what it's like to grind endlessly while also not really knowing or having a real direction of where you're going. You just kind of know you want to build a real body but having no real aim. And so I had to really figure out how to build an aesthetic body and how the mechanics of that work. In a day and age where most people think that it's just genetics or luck or steroids, which is what gets you to that sort of 10 out of 10 aesthetic V-taper type of physique, people don't realize that it's more about discipline and the right training approach that actually gets you the results that you want. And that's why I created the school community of Ascendancy, where I share all of the things that I've learned over my past 3 years of lifting when it comes to diet, training routines, and as well as a handful of AI generated tools. One of the key tools of it being my phenotype predictor. This is a tool that takes DNA files and generates high quality reports based on your own personalized muscle genetics. And with this sort of information, we use that to build you a tailored fitness plan that will work for you long term and get you the results that you're looking for. This personalized PDF that you'll receive from this tool will give you information about your general health, muscle genetics, as well as hormonal traits and aesthetic traits as well. And even if you haven't taken a DNA test, since this community is in its early stages, I'll be able to work with you to build you a custom personalized fitness plan. We also do weekly calls to check up and do discipline, make sure that you're actually following the plan, and as well as a refund at any time if you're not happy with the services. So if that sounds interesting to you and you're really thinking about taking the next step into doing that and taking this seriously, hit that first link in the description. There you'll be taken to my about page and you can get started today. That being said, peace. Bloopers, I don't really have too much to say, honestly. I'm gonna keep this pretty short and sweet. Yeah, I mean, look, I put together this diet which is pretty, it's supposed to basically be the perfect diet. And you know what? Since if you stayed all the way to the end of here, I'll probably just tell you. I'll tell you what my list is, since you stayed till the end, because I want to get your opinion, because it's like pretty much the goals that I had for this diet is pretty much to retain high muscle mass, low body fat, good energy, a lean face, high testosterone, and then bone mass. So it's pretty much obviously look that blend of just like, the classic gym bro, like, you know what I mean, sort of thing goals, but then also with the looks maxing stuff when it comes to like lean face, bone mass. I really think that's really more important. I want to take it a lot more seriously, because most of these things, like pretty much besides high muscle mass and low body fat, everything else, like until recently, I just never really cared about it. So, I mean, I guess, it's a pretty good thing to look at, but enough yapping. So looking at the proteins: steak, ground beef, chicken, salmon, lamb, eggs, Greek yogurt, cottage cheese, white fish. I don't really like fish like that. And then liver, beef, lamb. I'm probably not going to be eating that either. But there's that. Carbohydrates, white rice, sweet potatoes, sweet potatoes, white potatoes, oats, bananas, strawberries, oranges. You know what? I'm gonna just leave it on. I can't even like name it all. But pretty much, that's pretty much what my perfect diet is consisting of for just the, you know, ingredients. Or what the ingredients, bro? What am I? I'm so yapping, bro. I'm cooked, bro. I gotta eat. You know what I mean? But that's pretty much what my perfect diet has in terms of like the shopping list. You know what I'll do? I'll give you the stuff when it comes to the macronutrients, but for the micronutrients, I probably won't give you that stuff. But this is pretty much what I got for the macronutrients, for fats, lean meats, and like whatever. And honestly, I want to know what you guys think of it. I think it's a pretty solid lineup. But yeah, I mean, it's pretty much all I really got. I really need to focus on like I really want to improve my focus when it comes to these videos, because I've always been the type of person to when I'm recording, it's just too much, my brain. I'm just like so many different places at once. And I really need to be able to just focus on like concentrating and like delivering what it is that I have to deliver on camera. I think I've gotten better at it over the years, but definitely some improvement can be made. But yeah, I mean, that being said, let me know what you think of that in the comment section. I'll probably try to do more things like that, so like rewarding the people who stay here, because honestly, I don't really have very high retention. But anyways, with that being said, peace. Appreciate you for staying here. And yeah, I mean, if you want my not one-to-one, but if you want more access to things like my framework, my diet plan, and even calls with me, yeah, first link in the description, school community. First link in the description will be right there. You'll be able to talk with me. And yeah, get access to more videos like this, more structured information on how you can improve yourself when it comes to physique, looks maxing, and all things to do with that.